Karina, for the 29th, we have a tall story. This is a story about a man called Mr. Short. He was very tall. Mr. Short, his legs as long as telephone poles, and his head was always in the clouds. It wasn't easy being as tall as Mr. Short. He was lonely because he had nobody his own size to talk to, and to make matters worse, children made fun of his name. Silly old Shorty, long legs, they sang. One windy afternoon, Mr. Short went for a walk. The wind was blowing the clouds around the crazy that day. Suddenly something flew right past his nose. It was a kite. The kite tossed and tugged at its strings until it got away and tangled itself on a tower. Mr. Short looked down. Way below him, the children were pointing to the kite and crying because they couldn't get it down. Mr. Short was so tall, the top of the tower only came up to his chin. "I'll help you," he said. So Mr. Short took 2 steps on his legs as long as telephone poles and unhooked the kite, easy as winking. The children were very happy. They thanked Mr. Short for helping them and were never unkind to him again. Then last week, Mr. Short got a job, the perfect job for a tall man like Mr. Short. Can you guess what it is? He can get a job as a window cleaner, and the only window cleaner in the world who doesn't need a ladder. He made lots of friends and was never lonely again, which is a nice way to end a tall story, isn't it? So there is Mr. Short, with him being so tall, cleaning the windows and helping the children with their kite. Look at that tower that only came up to his chin. It's never nice to be unkind to anybody. You have a heart of pure gold, Karina. I know that you do. So always be kind. Always be loving. Because you never know what other people are going through. It was just after lunchtime on Saturday afternoon. Sam and Sally had spent the morning riding their bicycles. Now they were sitting under a tree in Sam's front yard, trying to think of something interesting to do. "I know," said Sally, as she ran across the yard and into her house. In a moment, she returned with a book. "Let's read some stories," she suggested to Sam, who was laying on his back looking up at the sky. "Look, these are the fairy tales my Mama and Papa read to me when I was too young to read. Papa said the stories are hundreds of years old. They were told to kids by their parents for a long time before they were ever written down." "Good thing somebody did write them down," Sam said. "Read them to me, Sally, while I lie here and watch the clouds change their shapes." So let's read the stories like Sam read to Sally, or Sally read to Sam. Little Red Riding Hood, Aesop from the Blue Fairy Book, collected by Andrew Long. Once upon a time there lived in a small village the prettiest little country girl that was ever seen. Her mother loved her very much, and so did her grandmother. The good woman made the little girl a little Red Riding Hood, which was so becoming that every day she called the little girl Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother, having made some pies, said to her, "Go, my dear, to take these pies to your grandmother, to take this jar of jam too. See how she is, for I have heard she had a cold and is not feeling well." And so Little Red Riding Hood set out immediately to go to her grandmother, who lived in another village. Little Red Riding Hood was going through the woods. She met a wolf. The wolf wanted to eat her up, but decided not to because he could hear woodsmen working nearby. Instead, he asked Little Red Riding Hood where she was going. The little girl did not know it was dangerous to talk with a wolf in the forest. Said, "I am going to visit my grandmother and take her the pie and some jam my mother made her." "Does she live far away?" asked the wolf. "Oh, yes," answered Little Red Riding Hood. "Her house is beyond the mill. You see there, at the first house in the village?" "Well," said the wolf, "I'll go and visit her too. I'll go this way, you go that, and we shall see who gets there first." The wolf began to trot as fast as he could, taking the shortest way. Little Red Riding Hood took the path which was a little bit longer way to go, and stopped to collect some nuts, chase butterflies, and gather flowers. So the wolf got to grandmother's house well ahead of Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf knocked at the door. Tap, tap, tap. "Who is there?" said grandmother. "Your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood," the wolf replied, changing his voice so he could sound like the young girl. "I have brought you a pie and some jam from my mother." Grandmother, who was sick in bed, said, "Pull the bobbin, and the door latch will go up." The wolf pulled the bobbin, and the door latch opened. In an instant, the wolf was on the poor grandmother, and ate her all up. A short time later, Little Red Riding Hood got to grandmother's house. She knocked at the door. Tap, tap, tap. "Who's there?" called the wolf. Upon hearing the wolf's big, deep voice, Little Red Riding Hood was afraid at first. Then she remembered that grandmother had a bad cold and might be hoarse. She answered, "It is your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood. I have brought you pie and some jam for my mother." The wolf, trying this time to disguise his voice, said, "Pull the bobbin, and the door latch will go up." Little Red Riding Hood pulled the bobbin, and the door opened. The wolf had put on one of grandmother's nightgowns, and was in bed with the sheets and blanket pulled right up to his chin. "Put the pie and jam there on the table," said the wolf, "and come sit here on the bed beside me, beside your dear old grandma." When Little Red Riding Hood sat on the bed, she was amazed at how her grandmother looked. "Oh, grandmother," she said, "what great big arms you have!" "All the better to hug you with, my dear," the wolf quickly replied. "Oh, grandmother, what great big ears you have! All the better to hear you with, my dear." "Oh, grandmother, what great big eyes you have! All the better to see you with, my child." "Oh, grandmother, what great big teeth you have! All the better to eat you with," cried the wolf, who jumped out of bed and began chasing Little Red Riding Hood all around the room. The woodsman passing nearby heard the commotion and came to investigate. He took one look at the wolf and knocked him on the head. After the wolf was dead, the woodsman could still hear a voice coming from the wolf's body. So he took out his knife and cut open the wolf. There was grandmother. She was so happy to be freed that she forgot all about her cold, and all the three of them, the woodsman, grandmother, and Little Red Riding Hood, had pie and jam together. Oh, baby. Look at Little Red Riding Hood. There's the wolf. You have to be careful in this world. It's the hardest thing to know is what people's intentions actually are. It's the hardest thing in the world because you think that everyone's good and sweet and kind and nice and gentle and soft. But some people really aren't. They're abrasive and aggressive and mean for absolutely no reason at all. And then when you run into these people, it's best to just not go by them, not go near them, just avoid them, pray for them. Because it makes life hard, right? When you want to just have someone be so nice to you and then someone isn't nice to you. So what do? You leave the situation. It's the best thing to do. There's difference between being just regular, like in your own body, abrasive and aggressive, and being just non-confrontational. People are like that. But like when someone has ill will towards you and you know it because you can feel it or you see it, or you know, like you don't want to believe it, but like then they do something and it's like, oh, just leave the situation. Don't stay in it. It's better to leave it and just believe people when they tell you who and what they are. You know, just believe people. So the wolf disguised who he was, eighth grandmother decided to disguise himself as the grandmother and to try and eat Little Red Riding Hood. And she was saved by the gentleman who saved her and the grandmother. So let's do Old King Cole was a merry old soul, and a merry old soul was he. He called for his pipe, and he called for his bowl, and he called for his fiddlers three. Every fiddler had a very fine fiddle, and a very fine fiddle had he. Oh, there's none so rare as can compare as King Cole and his fiddlers three. Karina, baby, I love you, and I miss you, and I can't wait to see you. I hope that you had a great day today, honey.